might have to leave early because I have a medical appointment.
No worries. Thank you. All right. Lamadal Damadalef, 34a at the bottom. We begin laws of Tefillin. 4 lines from the bottom of the page. These are 2 dots. Lamadal Damadalef, 34a, the last page on the first packet, and then the second packet. So first the last page and the other kind of copies. So, and then that's it. Yeah. Okay, so what you want to help me show what it is? It's the last page of the first one. Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, so 4th line from the bottom of the page. There's 2 dots there. So as is with all the Gemara's analyzation, it begins with the statement of the Mishnah.
Okay.
So the way we launched into this whole discussion on mezuzah and tefillin was because the Mishnah was listing a number of items that all come together. Right, the Mishnah and began with Menachot talks about this tractate talks about mostly the service in the temple, and the Mishnah got to the 7 branches of the menorah and how they are all one mitzvah. The Mishnah also mentioned other things which are in parts but are part of one mitzvah. So tefillin, right? Each mezuzah and tefillin, each letter in the mezuzah and tefillin are inseparable from the entire whole, as opposed to each letter is another mitzvah. And if I did half the letters in the mezuzah, I got half the mitzvah, or I got the mitzvah but didn't get all the pieces or something like that. Or like maybe let's say I wrote one parsha, not the other parsha, so I got one mitzvah, didn't get the second mitzvah. Like for example, with the hand tefillin and the head tefillin, at least according to many opinions, if you put on one without the other, you fulfilled at least one obligation, one mitzvah. So one might think the same way of each of the sections of the tefillin and mezuzah. So the Mishnah introduced tefillin and mezuzah by saying that just like the menorah is 7 branches, it's all one mitzvah. And if you had 6 branches, it's not as if you did part of the mitzvah, you did nothing. It's not a menorah. So likewise, tefillin and mezuzah are not to be called tefillin or mezuzah unless it has all the components, all the writing. And that's the way tefillin is introduced, and that's how we're going to begin our analyzation in the Gemara from the Mishnah's introduction. So the Mishnah's introduction reads, Arba Parsha Tefillin, the 4 paragraphs quoted in the Tefillin, right? There are 4 times throughout the Torah where the Torah says, write these words upon your hand and on your head, or bind them on your hand and a sign on your head. So those 4 sections of the Torah are written on our hand and on our head, just like the mezuzah, where twice it says, write these words on your doorpost. So we write both of those on the doorpost. So the Mishnah said that these 4 parshas, ma'akvei zu, they literally translated, they hold each other back. That is to say, one hasn't fulfilled any part of the obligation with either 1, 2, or 3 of them, unless one has all 4. So it's not as if there are 4 different mitzvahs that come together in one. There are one mitzvah that has 4 components, and you're missing one component, the whole mitzvah is gone. And the Mishnah continues, Vafilu ksav echad, even one letter, ma'akvan, would hold back the entirety of the mitzvah. Every single letter is important and part of making the one great mitzvah. Missing one letter, the whole mitzvah is invalid. Same thing as the mezuzah. The Gemara is going to do the same discussion it had with respect to the mezuzah. And the Gemara is going to say as follows: Pshita, this is obvious. Torah says write these words, then you can't not write these words. If you don't write these words, you haven't fulfilled the obligation. Where's the big chiddush? Where's the big novelty of the Mishnah in telling us that if you don't have all the words of the tefillin, it's not valid? Of course it's not valid. The Torah says write these words. You don't have all the words. So the Gemara answers, Nitzrach Amar Yehuda Amar Rav, Rav Yehuda said to Rav, Loi, it's not so obvious. Nitzrach, we need it, Ella, for the case of nothing other than L'koitze shal Yud, the spike above the Yud. So the Yud is like a tiny little bar, has a spike going down or a spike going up. And you'll remember from our discussion then, there was a discussion in the Gemara then, which one is it talking about? Is it the spike going up or the spike going down? Which one is the one that invalidates the mezuzah if it doesn't have it? But whichever one it is, even if it's missing that little spike, either the spike of the Yud coming down or the spike going up, then the entirety of the mezuzah is invalid. That's how far we're going. And that's the Mishnah's novelty, the Mishnah's law, in telling you that even the little bit of writing is missing, it invalidates the whole tefillin in this case. The Gemara says, Nami Pshita. This too is obvious. It's part of the letter. Why would I not need it? The Gemara says, no, Loi, it's not so obvious. Nitzrach, we need it, El Idot Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav. We need it for another statement that Rabbi Yehuda said in the name of Rav. Because Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav, Rabbi Yehuda said in the name of Rav. Amar Yehuda Amar Rav, Rabbi Yehuda said in the name of Rav. Call ois, any letter. She'ein gvil mukafla, where me'aber chaysaha, where it doesn't have parchment surrounding it on all four sides. That is to say, it's not touching any of the letters. Psula, it's invalid. So you have all the letters there. So what the Torah says, write these words, I've done it. But I happen to have two letters touching. So it's not obvious from the verse itself that the letters can't be touching each other. The Torah just says, write these words. I wrote the words. If they happen to be touching, why should I invalidate it?
Words or letters?
Letters or words, either.
Letters or words.
Well, words touching would be letters touching, right? The truth is, you're right, actually, because when it comes to words, they have to be a little more farther apart. We talked about this before. If they're too close, then it looks like one long word, which is another problem. But here, the Mishnah is specifically talking about how each letter needs to be the Mishnah, where the Mishnah says that it has to be surrounded by parchment. That is to say, it's not touching any of the letter. And there's the novelty.
End of the line as well.
Sorry?
End of the line also be a problem.
Right, so it has to have parchment surrounding it, which would mean if it's at the end of the line and there's no parchment between it and the end, there's no margin, then it's also invalid. It has to have parchment all around.
The space is very important in and of itself.
That's correct. Okay. Having said that, thank you. The Gemara now launches into the making of tefillin. And the first thing the Gemara does is, where does the word tefillin come from even? Doesn't directly ask that question, but it seems like that'll be emerged from it. I think this is where the word tefillin comes from. Any other source for what the word tefillin come from? Because the Torah doesn't mention the word tefillin anywhere.
I think it's a Torah.
What does the word tefillin mean? I think it's a composition of these words, tetafos and other words. No? I got that wrong?
Of the foreign languages.
That's the word tetafos. We'll get that in a second.
Tefillin is a kind of, it can be an ornament.
Tefillin means an ornament.
With the word like lefalel means to judge, but the literal meaning is like
An ornament. Okay, so never mind that. But the point is, the Torah doesn't mention the word tefillin anywhere.
Yeah.
But the Torah does say to put a sign upon your hand, and then it says tetafos on your head. So what does tetafos mean? And how does this help us understand how you make the tefillin on the head? So Tan Rabbanan, our sages, taught Mishnaic age text. The Torah says 3 times the word tetafos. So I mentioned before the Torah says 4 times to put on to write these words upon your heart and upon your head, or upon your arm and upon your head. But the 4th time, it doesn't say the word tetafos. It just says a remembrance, zikaron beinecha, as a remembrance between your eyes, which will help us understand how tefillin is made in a moment. But the first 3 times, or actually I'm not really sure what order, but 3 out of the 4 times it says the word tetafos. So the Mishnah says, this Mishnaic age text says, tetafos, l'tetafos, l'tetafos. Torah says 3 times the word tetafos. But you'll notice that 2 of them, there's no vav in between the 2 tesses. Whereas the 3rd one has a vav. Harei kan daled, that gives you 4. How's that? The first tetafos without the vav is singular. The second tetafos without the vav is singular 2. The tetafos with the vav is plural, making 4.
Actually, our Torahs are different, yeah.
Sorry?
I think that our Torahs are actually...
Tosfos discusses that a little bit.
Because the writing is a different for us.
Tosfos discusses that. But let's just leave it as this. So, Harei kan dalet, you have 4. Divrei Rabbi Shmuel, these are the words of Rabbi Shmuel. So this is Rabbi Shmuel comes to the conclusion that the tefillin has to have the ones on the head, which is described as tetafos, need to have 4 compartments. And Rabbi Kiva says, Einei tzarech, I don't need that. I don't need to come onto this idea that tetafos is 1, tetafos is another one, and then tetafos with a vav is another 2. But take the word tetafos itself. Tat, the word tes, bekitvi. And you would know what that language is? It's a language.
Caspi?
Maybe Caspi?
One of them is a African.
African, that's the next one.
Oh.
Katvi is what language? Maybe Stanzalz would know. But because in Katvi, in this language, shtayim means 2. And the next word, feis or pas, fe tough, ba'afriki, in African, shtayim means 2. So the word tetafos is comprised of 2 words, 2, making a total of 4. Does that mean you need to have 16 compartments? 4 from each one? Because the word tat means 2 and the word pas means 2, so 16. No. So in the same way, the Torah says, in other words, like this, right? The Torah says twice, write these words upon your doorpost. Let's say, right? So we don't write two different scrolls or two different mezuzahs and put them on the door because it says twice. We put them both in one. So in other words, each of the times the Torah says write this as a sign upon your heads is describing the same thing. Write this upon your head. Write this upon your head. Write this upon your head. Not to say that you have to write this and then again this and then again this, but the same this is being described 3 times. So the word tetofes itself, which means 4, this is what Tosfos tells us.
Yeah, it takes the extra vav from one of the words.
The Rashi Tosfos tat bekitfish nine. You see at the beginning there? So in other words, each time the Torah said the word tetofes, it's describing the same item. And that same item is made of 4. So even though it says it 3 times, it doesn't mean to have it 16 different compartments. So this is the dispute between Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Akiva. Whether you isolate each tetofes from each other, and therefore, according to Rabbi Shmuel, each tetofes means 1, and then the extra vav means 2, total of 4. Which Rabbi Akiva says, we're describing one item 3 times. And that one item is 4 tat and fais, each meaning 2 in different languages. Okay, so now we know that the tefillin, the head tefillin has to have 4 different compartments. Okay, so Tan Rabbanan, our sages taught, following that, if it's 4 different compartments, one might suggest that you should write them on 4 different pieces of leather, that is 4 different pieces of parchment, and then put them bedalad batim in 4 different compartments, bedalad oris, each made from a different leather box. Well, why not? If the word tetofes means 4, and we're saying you have to have 4 different things on your head, that's what the word tetofes means, put an item of 4 on your head. So 4 different boxes on your head, each with another scroll. So Talmud Leimer, therefore we had the 4th time the Torah says to put the tefillin on your head, but this time it doesn't use the word tetofes. It says lezikarim b'nenecha. It says it should be a remembrance on your eye, a remembrance between your eyes or on your head. Zikarin echad amarti lach. So here the implication is, I tells you, the verse is speaking, that you should have 1 remembrance, not remembrances upon your head. It's not 2 or 3 remembrances. So on the one hand, the Torah says the word tetofes means, let's go with Rabbi Akiva's view, that tetofes means 4. So we know that the tefillin on your head has to have 4 compartments. On the other hand, the Torah says there has to be 1 remembrance. So Kate said, how do you do this? You write your tefillin on 4 different pieces of leather, 4 different scrolls, umanichim bedaled batim, and you put them into 4 compartments, ba'oid echad, made of 1 piece of leather. I'm going to translate the next couple of lines as literally as possible, because it's a bit confusing and there's a whole bunch of different commentaries as to exactly how we interpret the next couple of lines. But I'm going to translate it as literally as possible, which is following one version of Rashi, I should say, one understanding of Rashi, and then we'll go to the halacha. So Kate said, how is it done? You write on 4 different pieces of leather. You put them into 4 compartments. Made of 1 piece of leather. Now I've covered both bases. I've covered the verse which says you have to have it tetofes 4 because it's 4 compartments. But it's also a zikaron in the singular. It's a remembrance in the singular because it's 1 box. It's 1 piece of tefillin made out of 4 compartments. Now, if you wrote it on 1 piece of leather, and you put them into 4 different compartments made of 1 piece of leather, Yatza, you fulfilled your obligations. What does this mean? How do you write them on 1 piece of leather and stick them into 4 compartments? So it's seen from Rashi, at least one version of Rashi, that it looks something like this. It took me a while to figure it out, so I decided to make an illustration. So this is 1 piece of leather. 1 piece of leather, let's just imagine. And you made slits here. And you can write, so you would start, to use one of them, from here going downward, like this. And then the next one starting from here going down, and then you slip them right into the compartments. Following? Yeah? Is that clear?
Yeah, how do you slip them into the compartment?
You push them in.
These are your compartments. Oh, we get an easier one.
Oh, yeah.
4 compartments,
Okay.
right? And you would slip them in like that. So they're all attached to the bottom.
And then
Upside down.
and then it wraps
Well, let's
around.
no. So let's say that's why I said let's say you no. This is
You have to write four different.
these are 4. This is the leather which you're writing the tefillin on. This is not the tefillin. This is the leather with the scroll. This is the scroll.
The scroll, yeah, the parchment.
This is the scroll. This is the parchment.
Parchment.
Yeah,
This is
Not
the parchment.
not
So you're writing it. They're both leather, right? So let's do
Yeah.
parchment versus box.
Right.
Okay. So this is your parchment. You're writing it on one piece of parchment, and then you're slipping these 4 fingers into the 4 compartments. Clear?
Okay.
This is leather. This is not leather. This is the parchment, right? But you're writing it like this: Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, going downward like this, so that when it's inside the box, it's writing downward like a scroll. So even if let's say you rolled this up, I don't know, you folded this up and you folded that, and you slipped them in, but they're all attached to the bottom, so it's one piece of leather. Clear? Yeah. Okay. So now says the Gemara, says the Mishnah. So if you did it like that. So in one piece of parchment, and you slip them into the 4 compartments, you fulfill your obligation. But there has to be some space between them. So we'll go with Rashi again. There's got to be some space between the 4 compartments. So whereas these 4 compartments are all very close together, right? There are 4 compartments there, but they're very close together. We'll talk about this more in a minute, but we're sticking to the literal interpretation at least. So they need to these are very, very close together. If you put them on one piece of parchment, you'd have to have space. This is the words of Rabbi. The sages say, you don't need that much space. You don't have that much space. But nonetheless, minimally, they both agree, you have to be able to put a string, or you should actually put a string, between each of the compartments. This is one reading of the Gemara, there's a few, which means like this. These are so close that they might have been glued, I don't know, but it'd be very difficult to take a piece of string and slip it between these boxes. Right. So, whereas Rabbi said you have to have actual space between the boxes, the sages say, okay, you don't have to have that much space, but they will agree with Rabbi that at least you have to be able to put a string between them. So very, very minimal amount of space between each of the compartments. Okay? Moreover, if the scratches that separate the 4 boxes are not visible from the outside, so even if they're separate on the inside, but from the outside, let's say you painted it over, you plastered it and pasted it so well that it looked like one big box, but on the inside it was separated by 4. Yeah, if that were the case, psulos, they're invalid. So this is at least one literal interpretation of the Gemara, but it's not very clear because, for a few different reasons. When the Gemara said you have to put a string between them, and you have to have space between them, is it talking about space on the parchment, or talking about space on the boxes? I interpret it means space in the boxes. That's how I interpret it because of the way Rashi writes, but that's not necessarily clear. Moreover, when it says that they agree that you have to be able to put a string between them, is that talking about only when you have it on one piece of leather? So when you have it on one piece of leather, you're required to put a string between them to make a separation, because when you have it on one parchment, I'm using the word leather. If you have it on one parchment, if you have all the text on one parchment, then you're required to make a separation between the boxes. But we're trying to balance these two things here. On the one hand, the Torah says it has to be 1 remembrance, and on the other hand, the Torah says it's 4. Right? So if I put them on one piece of parchment, so I've to some degree ruined the 4-ness of it. That's on one parchment. So in order to bolster, in order to bolster the 4-ness of it, put string between them. Or the fact that there has to be string between the boxes are a separate law, independent of whether you write them on one piece of parchment or not. That's a whole other discussion. Right? I've been reading the Gemara literally that it means that the whole discussion about whether or not you need to put space or how much space you put is only when you have it on one piece of parchment. And then in order to bolster the 4-ness, you have to have separation here. And the sages are disagreeing. A lot of space or just the space of a string? But others argue, no, the issue of the string is independent of whether or not it's written on one piece of parchment. Even if it's written on 4 pieces of parchment, you still need to have a string between the 4 of them so that they are 4 boxes. You understand? Do you understand the confusion? Okay. So, moreover, to compound the issue, the Gemara is going to tell us later in the page from now that it's halacha b'Sinai, that it's a law from that we receive from Moshe Rabbeinu, that the boxes of tefillin have to be prudos. Right? That the split between the boxes should be all the way down to the stitching. So the separation between all the boxes should be all the way separate, all the way down to the stitching. What this means on the outside, on the inside, it's all kinds of confusion. So let's make a halacha kind of consensus. The first thing to know is like this. The Gemara told us that the 4 boxes coming together have to be made out of one piece of leather. The Gemara told us that. So what is one piece of leather? First of all, how do you do that? How do you do that? What you do is it's a very simple process. Rashi describes, if I have a mold that looks something like this. This is a mold. And then I take a soft piece of leather and squish it inside. Squeeze it with pressure, let it dry up, and then I remove the mold. I have one piece of leather made into 4 compartments. Clear? Okay. However, at least according to some opinions, leather that's been stitched or glued together is considered like one piece of leather. Clear? Other opinions say that one piece of leather glued and stitched together is considered like one piece. So this and this, you can have a look. Oops. There are different pieces of leather, you can see. Different pieces of leather coming together that are stitched together to become one. It's not one piece of leather, the whole box. This one here is one piece of leather. If you look closely, the whole entire thing is one piece of leather. Whereas these ones are stitched together. Right? So I want you to look at this pair of tefillin here, for example. Okay, so the one law is three different laws. One law is that if it's stitched together, it should ideally be made out of one piece of leather. But if it's glued together, at least according to some opinions, it's still considered one piece of leather. Okay. Another law is that the markings of the separate boxes need to be visible on the outside. Another law is, at least according to many opinions, you have to be able to put a string between all the boxes all the way from top to bottom. Right? So combining all these laws together, if the Torah is requiring that you have to have a separation between each box, and according to some opinions, glue makes it into one, then you have to be able to separate it from the top all the way till the bottom. So the halacha is, at least if it's halfway separated, it's still kosher. So back in old times, right, if you want to have a nice box, right, another thing is that the Torah says that it has to be square. This one has to be square. So if you want to have 4 different boxes back in the old day, and you want to make them square, the best option is to put glue. But that would ruin the fact that the Torah says they have to be separate. So the general accepted practice was, as long as halfway down you can separate it, which means you can literally take a thin knife and stick it inside, in between these boxes here, and separate them. At least halfway down would be kosher. But today, with hydraulic pressure and all kinds of things like that, we can get away with separating it all the way to the bottom. And therefore, the best type of tefillin are what's called prudos, which means that the leather boxes are literally separate on the outside all the way to the bottom. Which means your pair of tefillin, you can take a thin knife, blade, and stick it into your tefillin, and it would go all the way down to the bottom, separating each of the 4 compartments, even though at their presentation, it looks like it's one. So if you look at this one, it's a kind of hybrid, which makes it not as nice of a pair of tefillin, because essentially in this tefillin, if you look closely, the leather here is one piece of leather. It just happens to have scratches here to mimic the 4 compartments. The 4 compartments are on the inside on a separate box that they inserted into the one box, and in there they have separations, making it not as nice of a pair of tefillin. Look at it, you'll see what I mean. The same thing is true here. The outside scratches here are not actual separations, they're just scratches. On the inside, there's a separate, you can almost pop it out. See, it's a separate, and then on the inside, there's another box which has separations, making it not as nice as a pair of tefillin. A much more beautiful tefillin if the whole thing was made of one piece and separate all the way from top to bottom. You following? It's Machlokes Rambam and Tosfos and other opinions, and the conclusion I just gave you that in best case scenario it's best to have it separate all the way to the bottom. In fact, Alter writes in the Siddur, Tzarich sheyeh, that it's required to be separate from tzarech lashkiach liros, that you should go all the way to the bottom. So it almost seems like from not the Siddur that it not just it's best, but you should. Whereas in the Shulchan Aruch, he writes some opinions say the separation only has to be halfway down, but the vision of a scratch all the way around. Others say it should be go from top to bottom separation. The custom is to have from top to bottom, but if you only had half of it, it's still kosher. Is that somewhat clear? So
Why half? Because there's a stitching on
why half?
from
Because at least it's separate, right? Because in other words, according to the views which say that attached pieces of leather aren't one, then even if you had glue all the way from top to bottom, it would still be considered separate. Because glue doesn't make something one, right? I mentioned in the beginning
right. It's a
that
separation
the
in and of itself.
that's right. So according, in other words, I mentioned in the beginning that the Gemara just told us that the tefillin has to be made out of one piece of leather, the compartments, right? And I mentioned to you some opinions say that glue is considered one makes it into one.
Mm-hmm.
If gluing and stitching pieces of leather together make it one, then if I stick glue between each of the compartments, then they're not separate. They're one.
Okay.
On the other hand, if I'm of the opinion that gluing does not make something one, then put as much glue as you want.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It's kind of in the middle. So, it's the same. Especially back in the old day, where it's very hard to get square tefillin without glue. The accepted practice was they put glue halfway up, so you had somewhat of separation, somewhat of separation between them, but they still stayed together. Today, you pay a few extra dollars and you get a beautiful pair of tefillin, ma'or echad, made of one piece of leather, and prudos. Prudos means separation, means separate, which means you can literally take a knife and push it all the way, a thin blade, and push it all the way between each other. Even though the Gemara seems to be saying, the literal interpretation, that the separation is only required if they're made out of one, if the scrolls are made out of one parchment. But nonetheless, because of the other Gemara, because of other interpretations of the Gemara, there are certainly opinions, very strong opinions, that there always has to be able to be that separation. And definitely that's the best case scenario, even though in second rate, it might still be kosher with comprised leather and don't have separation. Like this is just these are fake scratches. You saw it. You saw inside how these are just fake scratches. They're literally just they're designed just to fulfill the law, which says that you have to be able to visualize on the outside the separation, right? Whereas the real separation is on the inside here, but they're getting away with one piece of leather by gluing it together, right? On the other hand, if it's one piece of leather by gluing it together, then you don't have a separation at all because it's glued. So you're burning the candle on both edges. On the one hand, you're relying on the fact that it's glued together, making it one. On the other hand, you're saying it's still considered separate, even though it's glued together.
Right.
You're burning the candle on both edges. You're relying on two different. Makes it not you're making it not as nice as a pair of tefillin, even though technically speaking, it might still be kosher. All right. So now, at least after today, you understand. Be a little educated when you're buying a pair of tefillin. You know what you're asking for. At least in this one component, is it made out of or echad? Is it made out of one piece of leather? And number two, is it prudos? Is it separate from top to bottom, or just separate at the top, or is it only separate on the inside and the outside is just a scratch? Various different levels of better and better pairs of tefillin, even though all of them, at least according to some opinions, would still remain kosher. Yeah. All right. Have a wonderful day, everybody.
Thank you.